Hello everyone, it's your favorite Janelle in Space here, and sorry for the lack of uploads. You may think it was because I was stressed because of the snowstorm that came into my area and made things difficult. No, it was actually because I was frozen for several days and then unthawed and then frozen again and then unthawed. It was a very painful and slow process, but the point is I'm back now, and during my unthawing process, I had the time to read some webcomics and that kind of thing. And one of them that caught my eye was a surprising source being Pizzacake comics. Pizzacake. I'm gonna accidentally keep calling it Pizzagate, but that's not what I'm referring to. Because, well, long story short, if you know anything about her, you would probably be questioning, well, why on earth would you be talking about anything she made in a even vaguely positive context? Because she has a reputation as a pretty bad comic creator, and I'm not exactly going to refute that. Her political comics suck, and she has questionable comedy, but I do want to be fair. Never let me said I don't try to be fair, because honestly, her zombie comics or zombie comics are actually pretty good. Like, not even like it's kind of good. I think it's honestly good. Like, good writing and good characters. And I want to get into that. And also, I've been wanting to occasionally do a video or something like this where I talk about good media by people who either usually make bad media or stuff like that. I thought it'd be a fun topic, and this happened to be a great way to talk about it, so let's get into it. Now, first thing I want to do is a overview / kind of me talking about the highlights of these Zombie comics. Now, to be clear, these aren't, from what I can tell, a different series, strictly speaking, more like a gag that kind of spun off over time, and we'll get into that, actually. But I do want to cover, I'm also getting everything from the Tumblr here, so I know there's on Patreon probably some extra comics that haven't been released yet, and there might be some missing for whatever reason on a different site, but I couldn't be bothered to go find it. And all I want to talk about with the comic is here anyway, so... And I'm not even going to talk about every single bit of the comic here. I do encourage you to read it all. It's not super long. But I just want to get some clarification. If you don't see me talk about one particular comic in this series, it's possible I didn't know about, but it's just as likely that I didn't consider overall important. So I actually to get the setup out of the way, this does loosely seem to follow her normal lore for her and her family in the comics, when she makes the bad political cartoons. But not really that much important to really be acknowledged, as it doesn't really factor in my opinion, if you ask me. Now, where this does start, where the actual thing I want to talk about, is in October of last year, 2025, where basically the thing is that, she's going as a zombie for Halloween, but she's actually becomes a zombie, or got bit by a zombie, or, that kind of deal. And then you get into hijinks about that. Now, that's a pretty fun, little silly Halloween comic that wouldn't have mattered anything more if not for the one in November, where basically it actually has a really funny gag about how it keeps this Halloween-themed joke going, where when her husband's questioning, wait a second, like, why are you still a zombie? And then she's like, well, they haven't come up with a cure for zombieism, so it's just stuck like this. That's actually, I'm going to be completely honest, I love that joke. Because it's a smart and clever way to keep what is supposed to be a one-off joke going, because, how would it just magically reset? That happened, and now the character has to deal with that. Honestly, pretty clever way of dealing with that. I like that. Good writing. We get some more stuff with some other supernatural monsters that I didn't really like too much. It was okay, I guess. Nothing special. We get then some little hijinks about her, the hijinks involving having her being a zombie with her two kids, which was pretty good. Some interesting character work. And you get a running theme that is going to come back in a little bit here, where she keeps occasionally eating people. Usually that people are somewhat annoying, kind of in some way, but it's not like it's not like a Punisher or even a Dexter kind of thing where you're kind of like okay, they do bad things, but maybe they're doing the better good in the end. It's not like that. She's just eating people. But we will come back to that. Now, why I think this comic series really gets good is with her daughter, specifically how she gets, when she comes back home, and she's has a scratch and such, and then when she goes to check on it, she finds that not only has her daughter been bit and is a zombie or going to turn into a zombie, I'm not entirely clear how that works, but she did so willingly, which causes a split in the family. Well, not a split in the family, but a split between her and her mom. And then eventually causes the mother character, to open up about how she became a zombie, and more specifically, that she doesn't really know how. This actually is where kind of the comic ends off when I started thinking about making this video, and it kind of comes back later. And we are going to do the most recent continuation later, like the most recently just came up a few days ago. But I actually want to take a step back for a moment, and I want to talk about some interesting narrative with this, if you will, before we move on to the rest. If you can just hold on for a second. Now listen, I'm a sucker for a good bit of urban supernatural fantasy. That is just one of the genres I just love. But zombies are always kind of a hard thing to work with, in my opinion. And just because of how the nature of it works. And while you could make a strong argument that what she actually is something closer to a ghoul than a zombie, depending on your definition of each term, I'm not going to split hairs on that. But this is actually pretty good, and I actually like it because it has some good character work. The characters actually feel like a family who's trying to deal with this. And while I do somewhat question how they can have such an open convention of every other supernatural, stereotypical monster just living in society, and which I do think kind of undermines it somewhat because it's just not properly explained. But of course, it is this. I am, of course, someone asking for I'm discussing deep characterization and themes with a thing that's spun off as a Halloween joke in a parody comic that mostly does bad political work. So I'm probably expecting too much. That's asking for things outside the scope. So I'm not going to knock that. However, what I do love is the symbolism, if you will, for a second on this. Now, I'm not usually a fan of symbolism. I prefer things in the story to be as the story are. But I would be denying my butt off if I didn't say that how she talks about how she became bit by a zombie and such didn't have some clear symbolism / parallels with, sexual assault and rape. And how the fact that her daughter chose willingly to become a zombie plays into that as well, the idea of consent here. And I like that in this case because, A, it's just good writing, it's good symbolism, and it's actually surprisingly done well because it works within the character narrative a little bit, but also is that it comes very shocking to me because if you know her normal political comics, she doesn't do subtlety or that kind of thing. It's just not what she does. But this is kind of subtle in a way. It's well written, thought-provoking in that sense. Even if it's pretty obvious, I do like that because it's really hard to get that kind of symbolism narrative right, but I like it here because it's done well. It adds to the story, not taking away or driving the story off in a direction that makes no sense. You see this kind of a lot with the X-Men, for example, how there's supposed to be a narrative for different minority groups, but then the logic of the story breaks down kind of if you think about it too hard, or just characters act like it's one thing when it really isn't. This is done much better in the Pizzacake comic because it works within the story. And you get to really feel the drama of these characters a little bit. How she is deeply concerned for her own daughter, which makes sense, both as in-universe and out-of-universe symbolism, and it plays into the character, making you feel for them in a very good way, and I really love this scene. These 3 comics in particular are actually what drove me to make this video, and I really do recommend you read them, and honestly reread them. I love this stuff. It was good stuff. Good, solid writing. I love it. Now, we're going to follow up the most recent chapters of this comic. Now, in the last few days, like I've mentioned previously, a few more parts have been uploaded to the Tumblr that basically go on that the mother is going on a quest to find out what exactly happened to her and basically work on either getting a cure for herself and probably for her daughter, or at least definitely her daughter as well. And she eventually meets this being, which I'm not entirely sure what this is precisely. I guess it's kind of angel-like, I guess. And this is where we kind of loop back around to what I mentioned earlier about her eating people, is that this whole thing of her being a zombie, the mother, is kind of pseudo-divine punishment because she was so not caring about the world that she didn't notice what looked like people needing her help, and she just chose not to do anything about it. She didn't choose to properly take care of her environment, and as such got punished for it in a comic sense. I don't want to say this is divine punishment. It's more like a Fey mythology kind of Celtic trickster thing, which is actually fine by me. I just kind of want to say there's a moral virtue here, but it also plays into something is how her attacking and eating people this whole time, wasn't real people, was the shapeshifter that kind of caused the shenanigans, so that kind of explains how she isn't arrested by the cops for crimes, although that does make me wonder if the politicians she's been eating were also real people, or were they also fake? I'm gonna guess fake, but still. But the whole point is, this comic plays into how her aggression, her just willingness to attack and harm others isn't a good thing. How she's been tested this whole time and fails over and over again, being impulsive and reckless and not caring for others. Which, listen, I don't want to beat down on real people, but in just looking at the character in the story, that is surprising, because the early part of the zombie comics do not present this as like a moral failing of her, that she is doing a bad thing or being reckless and harming people who don't deserve it. They play it off like a joke, and it works well enough. It's not super funny, but I mean, it's doing better than Space King jokes, so, you know, that's going for it. But then it loops back around where it's like, no, you're just being a bad person, a monster, literally. And that is surprising as it comes back around, because you don't expect that coming, and then it does. But then, even after all of it, she's more concerned for her daughter. She wants her daughter to be human, to be okay. Which, once again, does a good job. That's what ends off, for her begging that even if she has to be punished, her daughter, at least help her daughter, who's also just made a reckless decision. Which, once again, is some good character work, and is much better, in my opinion, than just the character, the mom, being like, oh no, please forgive me for all the things I've done, and I'm just going to, like, her, like, it shows a level of care, not, like, a actually good parent in fiction, in a way, concerned more for their own kids' safety and well-being than their own, that they don't want their mistakes, their punishments, to come off onto their child rather than themselves. A bit of a truly noble character work. Now, that's pretty much where it ends, so I don't have much else to say on the comic. I think it's honestly really good. And like I said, I'm not going to try to defend the most of your work, because most of the comics just kind of suck. But I would be lying if I said this was bad. It's good. Great, even. And since it's free, you should read it. It's good stuff. I highly recommend that. And I have made multiple videos, like, debunking claims or attacking other channels for various reasons, mostly in the political field. But I have to say this with fairness, I do occasionally, like I said, want to acknowledge when someone, even if I personally dislike them or dislike most of their work, does something that is legitimately good, legitimately well crafted and well written, and this was one of them. And I have no, like, backroom spite for it. I'm not gonna, like, go around and say, oh, but if it's like this, no, it's good stuff, good media, well written, and Pizzacake deserves praise for it, because it's good, and I legitimately say that. It's honestly good, and I hope you read it, because I enjoyed it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear your thoughts on the comic, or just my thoughts on the comic. Whatever, your thoughts on my thoughts of the comic. If you didn't like it, down below, you can dislike me and tell me where I'm wrong down below, and I will see you all next time.